Welcome to the Morning Glory Project, Stories of Determination, Extra Blooms Edition. These Extra Blooms episodes are revisits of our past guest. My co-producer, Angela Washington, and I very often find ourselves sharing updates with each other. Oh gosh, did you see what that guest was up to? Did you see what they did? Did you see that? Did you see that? And we figured that if we get excited seeing what new things they're accomplishing, that you might too. So these Extra Blooms editions are that, a little extra, where we revisit with a past guest to see what else has gone on since last we spoke. Maybe they've got a new passion project, a new idea, a new book, a new accomplishment, and we like to share that. So feel free to go to themorninggloryproject.com to listen to any previously aired episode. And we love it if you write a comment, share it out, give us a review, and let others know. Of course, you can always subscribe to the Morning Glory Project across all of the podcasting platforms. That way you just never miss an episode. So welcome to the Morning Glory Project. I'm glad you're here today, and I know that you'll love hearing from our Extra Bloom guest. I am thrilled today to welcome back to the Morning Glory Project for this Extra Blooms episode conversation with Shannon Curtis. And Shannon joined us very early on, actually, some couple of years back with her husband, Jamie Hill. She and he are partners in life and love as well as in music. And Shannon is the beautiful singer whom I got to encounter live first and then get to know on recording later. And I urge everyone to check her out. But today, we're not talking about what we did before. You were talking, I was interviewing you really about how to be a musician in a time of changing times when people are listening to streaming services instead of buying albums. And you and Jamie had forged sort of a non-traditional way. This is all pre-COVID, by the way. This non-traditional way of doing house parties and things where you made a living doing your music in a different way. That's not what we're talking about today. Today, you posed some questions on your new book, and this is just the advanced reader copy, but Good to Me, which is available on Amazon, and an album also by the same name, which is available through streaming services and other places. But you and I had this conversation, and these questions arose. How will empathic people survive the troubled times we're going through right now? How do we rescue our overburdened spirits from overlapping disasters, rising fascism, climate collapse, all of the craziness and cruelty and violence and civil unrest and insurrection, craziness that's going on, to say nothing of war and in Ukraine and other places, and immigration crises at the borders where we see people suffering. How do we cope with that? And from where can we summon the power to heal ourselves, our communities, and our planet? And so Shannon has created Good to Me because, confronted in late 2021 with her near-paralyzing anxiety brought about by the increasing fraught state of the world, she aimed her angst at her journal. Using tools she acquired in 12-step recovery, she set out on a quest for self-healing with the intention of nurturing her personal sense of peace and agency in a world on fire. So, Shannon, you're not alone in the world in the angst that you were suffering. In fact, you're not even alone in this conversation with that angst. Because you and I reached a similar crisis point in different ways, I think, during everything that's going on. Tell me about that moment when it was just all too much for you. And to be a sensitive, caring, compassionate human being in these times of so much suffering, it's hard.
Mm-hmm. It really is. Yeah, if you've got your eyes open and your heart open, you can't help but be affected by the state of the world, right?
Right.
And so when you say describe the moment, I mean, how many thousands of moments were there where I felt that overwhelm? So many. Like it really began in earnest for me in the 2016 election, and the following several years were just one trauma after another. Mm-hmm. And then the pandemic hit, and it was almost funny how just things were out of control. Like it felt like it felt like we'd accidentally ended up on the wrong cosmic timeline, you know, like we were suddenly in this world that didn't have to be this way, you know? And I found myself over and over again feeling kind of just paralyzed in that thought, like, all the problems are so big. What do we even do with ourselves, you know, on a day-to-day basis? And, you know, my job is I write songs and make records. That's what I do. I'm a singer songwriter.
Right.
And I have for the last 10 years made a new album every year, written 10 or more songs and made an album. And I came to the end of 2021 staring down January of 2022, which is typically when I would start writing that next year's album, and thinking, I have nothing. I'm so consumed with worry, fear, anxiety,
anger, frustration, all of it.
Yes, all of that. How on earth am I supposed to open up my heart and pour out its contents in the form of music and lyrics in the state that I'm in? And also, go ahead.
Well, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's just that I'm a writer, and I've written 3 of my own and 2 ghostwritten books in 5 years. That, you know, that I was on a similar pace in a different way.
Yeah.
And I was in the middle of writing a book during and after the 2016 election. And eventually, creativity took a dumper for me. It was just like I couldn't be present for it because I felt like I was missing several layers of my skin.
I know what you mean.
Like everything hurt.
Yes.
And it was hard. And I think to be a creative and to produce a product, yes, some of that comes from angst. I don't mean to say that somebody angsty can't write a poem or something like that.
Of course.
But for some of us, I think some people thrived in that they use their art as a therapeutic thing, and some of us our creativity got kind of shut down or thwarted. For me, I got to be like, well, what does this book even matter in these times? Who cares about this?
That's totally part of it. Like I in my thought process, I'm like, how am I going to do this? Okay, if I do manage to write an album, how is it going to be any good coming from somebody in the state that I'm in? And then thirdly, what's the significance of making art in a time when democracy is crumbling and the world's on fire? Like it seemed, as I was first approaching it, like this seems like a really insignificant act when there are such bigger problems out there that deserve our attention. And
our resources and our time and our money and all of those things.
Right. And that was sort of a nadir for me. That was like the low point. How am I going to do this? And I honestly don't know what it was. In some moment of clarity or inspiration or something, I thought to myself, you know what I really clearly need in my life is some healing around this stuff. And, you know, I've developed a relationship with my audience over the last decade or so that's pretty intimate. Mm-hmm. You know, and a lot of artists do. They write very personal things. A lot of people do that. But like, you know, it dawned on me that I might be able to use this opportunity of digging into why I was so broken in the midst of all of this.
What was your answer when you asked yourself that? Why am I so broken by this?
Well, you know, it was that's where I turned to my tools that I gleaned from 12-step recovery. You know, the last time that I felt so broken in my life was when I entered 12-step recovery nearly 18 years ago. I couldn't afford therapy. I was going through a really difficult time in my life, and I couldn't afford therapy at the time. And a friend who had begun doing her own personal work in the AA program said, you know, they've got this other program for Codependents Anonymous. You know, maybe you should check them out. Had never heard of it before, went home, Googled coda.org, and did their little quiz that they had at the time on the front page of like, are you a codependent? And I aced the test. So, you know, it was clear that this could be something for me. And I went to those meetings, and that time of my life was the last time where I lacked a sense of my own personal peace, and I lacked a sense of my own personal power in my life. And that program helped me figure out how to get to those things. And so it occurred to me that diving back into some of the principles that were especially meaningful to me in my recovery early on might be useful in this circumstance.
Okay, let's get to the tools in a minute.
Okay.
But I want to ask about the nadir first.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So that moment, I mean, let me say it from me. I've been through some things. I'm a survivor of some things that were pretty tragic and painful and awful, and have had some profound losses in my life. And so I have seen myself as a person who, yes, with resources and help, has been able to cope with things. And I've been able to triumph and rise above things and go on to build a happy, lovely life in lots of ways, not without its pains, but
Of course.
but well. And so I found that I was kind of surprised that I got knocked off my pins so much this time. And it wasn't just that there was a pandemic, because there were things that everybody was going through. Everybody was having a hard time. So I'm not comparing anybody's suffering to anybody else's. It was the accumulation of it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was being tuned into it that knocked me. And I think I just, I sort of felt like that. Remember those old Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons, and the coyote, first he falls down the canyon, then he hits the bottom, and then the anvil falls, and then the piano, and then it just kind of felt like, if I could make it a funny image, that would be it. But it wasn't so funny because it really felt like an anvil and a piano and TNT and everything else. And you also didn't get any dinner because the Roadrunner got away. So it just all felt like that. And so there you were. Tell me about when that kind of downward scoop hit. What was your experience of it in body, mind, spirit?
Body. I felt tired all the time, but then also couldn't sleep. My spirit was, I felt like I was scrambling every day, scavenging to try to find some meaning or moment of peace or purpose, or to, I was hustling around trying to figure out what I could do. How can I, but just really kind of consumed with these feelings that I didn't know what to do with, they really, I was kind of, it was a similar feeling. Okay. Let me relate this back to when I first joined 12-step recovery. I described then, and it was a similar feeling in late 2021 again, that I felt like I was enthralled to the whims of my emotions. Like I was at the tail end of a whip that just was being whipped around by whatever new input I was getting from the world and making me feel a certain way. I felt out of control, and yet was trying so desperately to figure out how to gain control. And these circumstances that were making me feel out of control, these big world events, these big things that were really stressing me out, I don't have access to control about any of that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, so it was just this losing battle over and over and over again, me trying to figure out how to gain some sense of I'm in control of my life when so much was out of control. So it just was this cycle of of being exhausted, and then being at the tail end of that emotional whip, and then trying to figure out how to gain control, and then just being anxiety ridden, and then falling into exhaustion again, and over and over and over,
Well, there's another piece of it too. I think that was, and I don't know if this experience rings for you, but I'm hesitant to say what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it. It drove me a little crazy when people would say, "Oh, I just can't watch the news anymore. I just have to tune out."
Yeah.
And on one hand, I completely understand that, because the news was so upsetting and frustrating and irritating. And on the other hand, I felt like if I was going to be an activist, even a responsible voter, a participant in our society, that I needed to understand what was going on. And I kept asking myself, many times we've asked ourselves in one way or another, if I was in 1930s Germany as an Aryan German, could I have been the person that hid Anne Frank in my attic, or would I have hidden? Would I have been too scared and protected my children? So I think that we've been given the opportunity to answer that question for ourselves. And I felt like I needed to be a participant and present and aware. I didn't feel like I had the luxury of shutting it all out.
Yes.
And at the same time, it was wearing away yet another layer of my skin, observing it.
I relate to that so much, Betsy. And that was part of my thinking too at that time. Like, I can't turn away. I can't just shut this off. Like, that's irresponsible. That's not the kind of person I want to be. You know, it drives me nuts when I see people living in la la land when people are suffering around them, you know, like I don't want to be that person. But also my like hyper attention to that stuff wasn't actually producing any productive results either.
Well, that's the other part of it.
So I knew that for me, I needed to get to a place where I could be engaged from an emotional state, from a state within my spirit, that I could be engaged in a way that maintained my inner sense of peace and actually gave me access to the power that I do have to act around the things that matter to me, you know?
Okay. So this is sounding a little like that. I call it Serenity Prayer 101.
Yep.
You know, the Serenity Prayer, for those unfamiliar, is a key part of 12-step recovery program. But I think also, just even if you're not in 12-step recovery at all, I think of it as less of a prayer than a sorting device. You know, yes. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I found myself saying, okay, is this a courage thing? Is this a wisdom thing? Is this, you know, which category do I need to put this in? Yeah.
This project, the Good to Me project, was centered on the principles of the Serenity Prayer specifically, the whole thing. It's funny, even though I was in the state that I described I was in at the end of 2021, the Serenity Prayer is still a part of my life daily. But I realized that if I could dig in a little bit deeper to the ideas of things I do have the power to change and the things that I don't, and what it means to have courage around the things I do, you know, that maybe that could help me access that state of mind that I wanted, the state of mind where I could have peace within myself in the midst of these horrendous times and have access to my power to act in ways that are meaningful. That was the entire purpose of this project, was to dig into those concepts of the Serenity Prayer. So that mantra is sort of like the foundation of the entire project. Yeah.
Well, you talked about other tools that you employed or rediscovered or applied in this new way. Can you say a bit about that?
Well, like I said, it was the framework for everything is the Serenity Prayer. So what I did was I sort of broke apart aspects of the Serenity Prayer and gave myself journaling prompts to dive in specifically to each of those sort of like smaller concepts within the Serenity Prayer itself. And just kind of made a little roadmap for myself to do journaling. And so I actually really haven't done a lot of personal journaling since my early recovery. But I got out my journal, yeah, I'm showing it to you here, and just wrote in pencil, you know, not frantically, just, you know, stream of consciousness sort of journaling in response to those prompts that I gave myself around each of those ideas, and let whatever needed to come out. Questions, ideas about like just digging into what I was feeling, what I was facing. Are the ways that I'm coping with this, are they working for me? Why are they working or not working for me? What do I need to let go of? You know, it's easy for me to be honest with myself in my journal. It's just me and the page. And so I'm not trying to front for anybody. I'm not trying to, you know, put out an image of...
You don't even have to make the handwriting pretty.
No, not at all, which made it interesting when I was translating my journal entries into this book, because I had to actually decipher that, right?
Is that an A or an O?
Yeah.
Well, it also strikes me that what you were doing and the wisdom of such coping strategies and things to do is that worry is just like static electricity. You know, it's just this thing, but electricity put on a wire and focused has some power to do something, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like, as you describe it, that focusing your angst, putting it in a place, having a channel for it, as opposed to it being kind of free floating, seemed to make it more, it made serenity more accessible to you, if that makes sense. Is that how you'd say it?
It does make sense. I definitely relate to what you're saying. For me, one of the first things I did in this project was name the stuff that was really stressing me out. Like really, really like.
And not with broad brush names, real specificity.
Real specificity. What's the stuff that's keeping me up at night? And why? Like, what are the feelings around all of that? You know, because for me, oftentimes when I'm having these like generalized fears or worries, they can kind of be like the monster under the bed. Like when the light's not on and you can't see its face and you can't name it, it's more scary.
It's real scary.
It has more power then. So the first step for me was to just flip on the light and be like, okay, what am I facing here? What am I dealing with? And then I went dug into like, what are the feelings I'm having around this stuff? Like, and get really specific again about those feelings. And identified for me, the two biggies were fear and anger. Those are the base feelings. And to hone in on the fear part of it, which ties into the worry stuff you were just mentioning a moment ago, I realized that fear, while it can be a useful emotion, like you were saying, when it's directed, when I'm sort of at the tail end of its whip, so like I described earlier, it does some pretty destructive things to me. Fear is a short-lived emotion. Fear is like, it's like that
sugar
moment,
high.
Right? Yeah. And it can kind of make you feel a little bit alive. I think that's why people watch scary movies, you know, like you kind of get that burst, right? And so, but because you kind of get that little bit of a high, so to speak, with this fear emotion,
even though it's unpleasant.
Exactly. I felt like I was, and I discovered this in my journaling, like that I felt this need to sort of stoke the fear, like to go back for more of that, which eventually turned into to worry, right? Just keeping the fear close, right? But as I explored what worry was doing to me, the image that came to my mind was that worry kind of became like keeping all this fear very close to me felt like this blanket, like I was covering myself in a blanket of worry. Because if I keep the fear close, maybe I can outsmart the system. Maybe I can not be surprised when the next shoe drops, you know, maybe I can like get one step ahead of feeling that insecurity that we feel about what's happening around us. But that's actually not the case, right? What that blanket of worry was doing for me instead was suffocating my spirit. Like it was taking away my ability to breathe and live and exist out in the open in the world. So this worry became something that just was killing me. And eventually I just started to sink into despair, which is not a place where I'm experiencing the peace and the power that I want in my life. Once I uncovered those things, those aspects though, like, and this kind of gets to your, like the focused, when you can focus the feelings are powerful, right? Like that fear feeling, when I let it take me at the end of its whip, has control over my life. It has that kind of power. However, once I was able to sort of like tease out and get deeper into these ideas about what I have power to change and what I don't, and let go of the things that are, you know, practicing radical acceptance around things that are out of my power, then I could revisit the feeling of fear again.
Well, and then that's where the courage can come in, because then okay, what part of this is within my control? What can I do? And I started to get real small about that. Like the really big things I realized I could do very little about, but I could pick a corner of it. I could write postcards for a candidate. I could be kind with my loved ones so that they felt good. I could act in, you know, they say think globally, act locally. I could think about what influence I had in my immediate world. So there were things that I began to shift. But, you know, I want to go back to worry for a second.
Yeah.
Worry is just such I heard somebody once say that the word worry comes from an original Greek source that means to chew and not swallow. Like you just keep chewing it and chewing it and chewing it.
Oh, that's great.
And my feeling about during this era has been, you know, you get a bite of something and you'd be chewing it and you hadn't yet swallowed, and another bite and another bite and another. And so pretty soon, you talked about it being suffocating. It felt like it was choking me in that way.
Yeah.
And so and yet at the same time, there are very dark things and there are very dark forces going on that cannot be denied. It's not just boogeyman. There are really bad things by bad people going on. So I didn't want to be blind to that, but I also don't want to be cynical.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be hard.
Mm-mm.
And to keep yourself soft, to keep your heart open is so counterintuitive. And yet you've done that in a way. And with this book, you've put your chin out for another different kind of a punch, but I don't think you'll get punched. It just seems that as I read through the ideas in this book, and also there are QR codes that people can use their phone on and listen to the music that you ended up creating. So you somehow got, by the journaling process, by your 12-step practices, by those self-care things, you got back to a creative place and indeed created the album Good to Me.
Yeah.
And created art out of the angst. Would that be a fair way to describe it?
Sure. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. The process was really, I gave myself these journal prompts, and wrote in my journal. And then when I was finished with that journaling, I went back and I spent days rereading what I had journaled and underlining, highlighting. And like each of those journal entries kind of became the source material for each song on the record. Mm-hmm. So if you listen to the album, you will listen going through sort of in a linear way through my process of identifying the stuff that was causing me to lose sleep at night, naming the feelings, the coping mechanisms that I was, how I was dealing with those feelings, naming stuff, making an exhaustive list of the things that I don't have the power to change. That was revelatory to make that list. And then to create a visual exercise for myself of actually letting go of those things. Wow, that was incredible. Then making a list of the things I do have the power to change. And then exploring the ideas of why courage might be needed to actually do those things. So like when you listen, you will experience my own process through all of these ideas, reaching a place at the end where I really come to the conclusion, and I'm still living in this mindset today. And I want to tell you,
well, because it's not over.
It's saving me. No, it's not over, but it is saving me. Even though there is still so much crap happening everywhere, it's a very small word actually for all of it. I'm living right now from a place of genuine joy in my life. Mm. I'm living from a place of feeling like I can stand on my own 2 feet and take a deep breath and understand that I have a place in this world, and I have a place. I have a purpose. There are ways in which I can act that does make a difference to all of these big things that I'm keeping my eye on and paying attention to. But I'm living in a place from this conclusion that I reached at the end of this project that, you know what, it doesn't do me any good to run around worrying or being fearful or angry about all of this. It's not doing me or anyone else any good. But maybe this work of healing ourselves, maybe this work of digging in and getting to the root of how we're feeling, letting those feelings tell us what we need and what we value and how to act on those things.
So rather than not feeling them or smushing them down or pretending they aren't so.
Exactly. So maybe doing that kind of, yes, exactly. Maybe doing that kind of work, maybe healing ourselves is really the best way we can be of service to each other. And maybe healing ourselves is the first and best way, maybe the most fundamental building block for how we collectively make a better world on a large scale.
Well, that's taking the act locally even smaller, to acting locally in your own body, in your own spirit, in your own. And, I do want to say one thing about that makes me a little hinky about this, not about you or your story at all, but about this thing is that I realized that many of the things that I was worried about, on one hand, I'm a person of great privilege compared to many people on the planet. I have a home. I have a safe relationship. I have a loving family. I have reasonably good health. I have a computer. I could talk to people. I have lots and lots of resources that some people don't have.
Yeah.
And so I almost felt guilty being so angsty. Like, who am I to complain? There are a lot of people that have a lot less. There's that kind of, you should feel so lucky, because you have food on the table. How dare you? There are people in India that don't, it's that old kind of scolding that we get. And I had to give myself permission to say, yes, I can acknowledge that I have comforts, privileges, and some things easier than many people in this country and the world have. And that the fear and the anger and the frustration and the worry is legitimate, is caused by a real thing. I was less concerned with how it was going to affect me personally than how it was going to affect my kids and potential grandkids and other people's kids and potential grandkids.
Yes.
Going on. I was really concerned about that. And I want to say that's legit.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I think that what you're saying, like, no matter what station of life you might be in, right? There's going to be stuff that is more challenging for you, or there's going to be stuff in which you have more privilege than others,
Right.
That is true no matter if you are a billionaire or you are living in the depths of poverty, that there's still going to be
somebody that's got less, somebody that's got more, right?
Yeah. And here's the thing, like, you could be living in times that are just blissful. Maybe think of a time, I can think of a time in my life where things were going great and I still didn't have a sense of inner peace. I still didn't have access to my own power, right? So this is one of the things I learned doing this project, actually, was that my sense of peace and power in my life is not dependent at all on my circumstances or my station in life.
Wait. Let's say that again.
My personal sense of peace and power are not dependent on my circumstances. I have the power to access those things. They are my birthright. I, as a being in this universe, it is my right to be at peace with myself and to live in my own power. That is just part of who we are, every single one of us. My circumstances don't negate that fact. And I allow myself to believe that circumstances dictate those things sometimes. But again, I've lived in times in my life where things outwardly have been great and I still haven't been at peace. Right. So this is the commitment to, like, doing the work to reconnect on a daily basis to my own sense of peace and power is something that I realize I need to make a commitment to do in hard times and in easy times, in all times. Can I share a quick story with you?
Yes.
When I was in the midst of all this, I saw a tweet. Somebody was linking to a Daily Show interview with Jay Shetty, who Trevor Noah was interviewing Jay Shetty. Jay Shetty has written a book called Live Like a Monk, I think is what it's called. Mm-hmm. And he did monk training some years ago in India, was training to become a monk. And he was sharing a story in this interview about how as part of his training, he accompanied his teacher on like a 72-hour train journey through India. And as part of monk training, you buy, when you're taking a train trip, you buy the least expensive ticket because it's an act of, like, detaching from material things and all that.
Right.
So they were in the most crowded, the hottest, noisiest, busiest car.
Dirtiest. Yeah. Everything.
All of that. Animals, people, everything, right? In the train. And 72-hour trip. So what he would do is at every stop, he would get off the train and find a quiet place to meditate, and then get back on the train when the train was ready to go off again. And at one of the stops, his teacher stopped him and inquired why he kept getting off the train to meditate. And he explained why, because I'm going to find a quiet place to do it. And the teacher said to him, "Do you think life is like the stops, or is life like the train?" And the lesson in that is that we need to figure out, if we want to be involved in real life, where real life is happening, right? And we're not checking out, in our numb corner of numbness or ignorance or whatever, mm-hmm. We're living real life. If we want to access our own sense of peace and our own sense of power in the midst of real life, we've got to figure out how to do it regardless of the circumstances around us.
How to meditate on the train.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to be on the train, that's where I want to be. I want to be with my people moving forward. Like, this is where we're at. It's possible for us to have that.
Yeah.
It's ours.
I've always thought of it as refueling in midair.
Yeah.
When you, you don't get to land the plane. You've seen those things where they actually refuel an airplane or a rocket or whatever it might be in the middle of the air. I think of it that way too. Well, Shannon, this book is not a book just to read. It's a book to do. It's a book that has questions, and it invites thought. It invites listening to music that supports what you're doing. It has little bits of wisdom and small exercises that are really useful. And it's a very slim, unintimidating little book that's called Good to Me. Shannon Curtis, thank you for this beautiful book and for this conversation and for being another bright and beautiful extra bloom for the Morning Glory Project. I so appreciate you.
Betsy, I love talking with you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
My conversation today, my extra blooms conversation today with Shannon Curtis really struck personal chord for me. I know that a lot of people have struggled in different ways for different reasons during the pandemic, during political unrest of the last number of years. And for some people, the pain was practical. They didn't have jobs. They didn't know how they were going to pay their bills. They may have lost their homes. Some people had immediate losses of loved ones, family members in convalescent homes that they didn't get to say goodbye to before they left the earth. Those are huge experiences. And I have to tell you, I was spared much of that. But to still be a sensitive and thinking and feeling person in troubled times is not an easy thing to do, but I think an important thing to do. And Shannon's music, as well as the strategies and practices that she offers in Good to Me, are super helpful for those of us trying to remain sensitive, loving individuals that come from a place of abundance, healing, strength, and peace, rather than fear and loss and worry. So that's some extra blooms from Shannon Curtis. I hope that you'll take those as inspiration for your own sense of peace and your own sense of healing and your own capacity to bloom.